Good evening, I'm Amy Robinson. Welcome to Ask the Specialist. Tonight we ask the funeral home directors on CMU Public TV. I'm Amy Robinson. Welcome back to Ask the Specialist. It's the program where your calls fuel our conversation. So please, if you have a question for our funeral home directors, we encourage you to call and get your questions coming in. Let me introduce our guests. Welcome to Taylor Sheahan-Stahl. Good to have you here this evening. Taylor's from the Charles R. Lux Family Funeral Home in Mount Pleasant. Tell me a little bit about your background in the industry.
I'm relatively young, and it's a little bit of an oddity that I have no background in the funeral industry. But I don't have any family in it. And I graduated mortuary school in December of 2013, and since then I've been working for Charlie.
All right, well, welcome. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Our other guest is Sherman Rowley with Rowley Funeral Home in Mount Pleasant. Welcome.
Thank you.
You have a few more years under your belt.
Just a few.
Tell me about your background.
Well, I'm like Taylor. I have nobody in funeral background in my family. Many years ago, I wanted to do something that would help other people. 40 years later, I'm still at it. I don't know if I haven't got it down pat yet or right, or, you know, it's something that there's a lot of self-worth involved in it. I've been here in Mount Pleasant almost 37 years. Worked for 3 years down in Lansing before I moved up here. And my family is all in this area now. I'm very fortunate they all live close to us.
You know, it's interesting to me that each of you come from a non-family background. You don't have family in the industry. And so while we're waiting for the calls to begin coming in and make it over their way over to the set, let me ask you a little bit about the career itself. You know, Michigan is always looking for careers for people, job opportunities, and you know, each of you coming from, again, a background where it might not have just been a natural thing. Tell me a little bit about the industry, perhaps growth that's expected, and the training that's needed to get into it. And Taylor, since you just went through that training, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'll take that one. In regards to the education requirements or so forth, I attended CMU for a number of years, and then I actually moved to Florida, and I went to school there for another 2 years, and I received an associate's degree and then came back and worked for Charlie. And you have to have a year of apprenticeship under a licensed funeral director before you get fully licensed. I chose to go to Florida instead of Michigan. Nationally, I guess the education requirements are pretty much the same, and state by state they can require if you have a bachelor's and associates. In Michigan, they only require an associate's. However, the only school in Michigan, Wayne State, offers a bachelor's degree. And since the actual content of the education is the same, I decided I'd save myself some money and a year off education and spend a year in Florida or so.
Well, and let me ask you this, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, so I'm not sure if you would know, but what kind of growth, if any, is expected in the field?
Yes, you might be able to hit that well.
Picking on age, right? You know, the baby boomers are starting to die off. Crude sense or a crude way of saying it maybe, but that's true. You know, healthcare is better, whether you like Obama's healthcare plan or not. It gave everyone that didn't have healthcare before healthcare now. You're going to see, I believe, the average age of the person dying is going to start being a little longer, a little older. But the baby boomers are starting to die off, and when that happens, the projected growth is quite amazing. Now, whether it'll be traditional ground burials like we've had for so many hundreds of years, or whether it'll be cremations, which are very prevalent now, 50% or more on an average funeral home is cremation. Some are a lot higher than that, and some are a lot lower than that too.
Let's get to some of our questions from our viewers. Thank you for the calls, and you still have time to get yours in. From Cadillac, we have a question. Can you rent a casket for a viewing when the person is being cremated? We were just talking about the prevalence of cremation. Maybe you could answer that for us.
You can. I would assume every funeral home's got one. They're both metal and wooden ones now that you can rent. When the service is over, the service will generally end at the funeral home if it's going to a crematory. The body is actually in what we call an insert that's inside of the casket. That's physically taken out and taken to the crematory, and a new lower part of the interior and a new insert and everything is done. You put it back up in your display room, and you can't tell it's ever been used.
Okay, very good. Thank you. From Flint, we go from Cadillac to Flint, and the question is, do you still have to be embalmed if you want to be buried within 24 hours? Taylor?
No, you don't. In fact, you wouldn't even necessarily have to be embalmed if you wanted to extend it out longer than 24 hours if there's proper refrigeration. Our state requires that either proper refrigeration takes place or embalming within 48 hours of death. So you have a good amount of wiggle room there.
All righty. I'll call this one a toss-up question. I'm not sure who can best handle it. From Charlevoix, a question on the requirements for being buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Are either of you familiar with those?
Matter of fact, I was just there in December with 70,000 other caring people. We put 240,000 wreaths on the graves in Arlington in 2 hours' time. It was a phenomenal
What
project.
group was that with?
I was with Dodge Chemical Company.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. Did you learn anything while you were there about this particular question about the requirements for being buried there?
But you know, there for a long time, space was an issue. And it had to be a high-ranking officer or a serviceman that collected a lot of high metals. But they now have a lot of columbariums, which are outdoors. These were with small niches in where a man and wife could be cremated and put in the same niche. And there's thousands of them available. So the restrictions, I think, is very liberal now compared to what it used to be.
Okay, very good. Taylor, a question from Prudenville. Can you be buried on your own property?
You know, it's funny, last year there was that same question, so I'm a little prepared, actually. In the state, you'd have to go through certain methods of getting your land zoned for a burial. And once you do that, you actually license your land as a cemetery with the state. And you have to have so many acreage in order to do that. There's a good amount of work you'd have to put into, and it would take a good amount of time in order to get your land approved by the state for burial. And once you do that, getting your land back to use for anything other than a cemetery is quite difficult. So once you have, I don't know the number of acres off the top of my head. But
I believe it's one.
Is it just one?
Yeah.
Okay, then you'd have 1 acre of land that you'd have to have approved for your own family cemetery or so, and then that would be permanently used for that. And if you had resale value of your property, you'd have to have some concern about that.
So let me ask you
Could I add a little bit to that, too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we actually did that. There was a gentleman called several years ago, and he said, I want to be buried on my own property. What do I need to do? So I found out for him, called him back, and he went through all the legal process to start his own cemetery. It's an acre of land up in the woods. He's got big boulders on the 4 corners. He's since then put up a gate with an archway across it. He and his wife are both buried in it, along with some of their other relatives. They had transferred here from downstate.
So when this is done, the landowner, the property owner, would maintain control over that cemetery. In other words, they don't have to, although it's registered with the state, it doesn't have to become a public accommodation.
No, it's a private cemetery.
Okay, very good. Let's stay on the issue of burial for a minute. From Grayling, a question: does the law require a person to be buried in a vault or casket? The question: can you be buried directly in the ground?
Yes.
Yeah.
Green burials, usually the body's not embalmed. They could be buried in just a muslin or cloth shroud. Could be buried in a wooden casket. There's no vault involved.
Do you need special permission for that?
Usually it's in a green cemetery.
Okay.
that is designed and developed for that way. Usually there's no markers or anything involved. It's just, you know, they go out and they'll tell you, well, you know, these are the spaces available, pick which one you'd like, and we'll go from there.
How does one find a green cemetery?
There are 2 in the state of Michigan, but I don't remember the name of the
I don't
cities or
either.
the cemeteries. I know one's down in the lower part of the Lower Peninsula.
Maybe an internet search would take care of that.
Exactly, it would tell you right away.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, it's not real popular in this area. I mean, I know funeral homes south of here that actually have green caskets, and they practice it. Now, whether they've ever used one or not, I don't know.
We have a question from social media we're going to get to in just 1 minute. I want to ask you, explain for me, what is a green casket?
A green casket is something that usually has no metal in it. It will rapidly disintegrate or decay, however you want to word it, in the ground. There's no embalming of the body because a lot of times people that want that type of a service don't want the chemicals in the ground that could leach into the groundwater. You know, they might use a register book that's actually made out of recycled paper, perhaps, or could be made out of bamboo. Bamboo is very popular, believe it or not. You can buy bamboo caskets, you can buy bamboo cremation urns.
All right, very good. Now let's go to our social media question. Are cremation services available for pets? Taylor?
Yeah, actually, my funeral home, we have a sister company in a sense that we take care of pet cremations. And it's very similar, but also very different in a sense. You have their own separate cremation facility, so the same chamber that human remains would be taken care of, a pet remains wouldn't be taken care of in the same thing. And for pets, you can do what's called a mass cremation or individual. So pets can be cremated multiple at a time or individually, similar to the way humans are cremated. And again, if you look online, there's lots of pet cremation merchandising, such as memorial jewelry or pet urns and so forth too.
What sort of pets have you had people request to be cremated? Mainly dogs and cats?
Yes, yes. But the company that we have paired, they've done, I should say, birds and so forth. I mean, they're very open. A lot of times they're very flexible, I should say.
Okay, very good.
We had a hedgehog a couple months ago.
Did you?
A hedgehog.
Okay, well that's different.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. From Claire, we have a question of a 70-year-old with no insurance and no family saying, what will happen to the body when this person passes on?
Well, if there's no assets involved, which quite often there's not, then the state will step in. The Department of Social Services will help with the burial or the cremation. Usually it's cremated because that's the least expensive way to go.
And that's paid for then by the state?
Well, a portion of it.
A portion of it?
Yeah.
If there is no family and no insurance, who pays the other portion?
You write it off.
Oh, I see. Okay, very good.
If there's no relatives or no one will step up. You know, sometimes there's relatives, but I haven't seen Aunt Martha in 40 years. I'm not paying for it. You know, you get that too. And
In Swartz Creek, from Swartz Creek, a question, is an obituary required in the state of Michigan? And how does one go about the cremation process? So kind of 2 questions here. Walk us through that a little bit. Let's start with the obituary requirement.
No, an obituary wouldn't be required by any means. It's definitely an accessory that you can add to any service. You can place obituaries in multiple papers too, as opposed to none. Some papers have things that are called death notices that they offer actually free to the family. Again, some. And that certainly wouldn't be something required. I'd say it's definitely a notification to the community, so a lot of families opt to place one.
And I want to get to this question on cremation and the process, but I'm going to tie it with this question from Hawks, which says, can I be cremated at home with a bonfire?
no,
That was my thought. Now, let's follow up with that.
for a couple of reasons. One,
Okay.
you won't have the correct paperwork. has to be signed by a medical examiner approving of the cremation. The death certificate can only be filed by a licensed funeral director, and the fire itself does not get hot enough.
Okay, very good, thank you.
And to elaborate on that
I
too.
didn't know there'd be so much to this one. This is interesting.
In school, I actually had somebody who was very curious about this. They were a Viking novice in a sense, and they were able to find that in Colorado, there's a company that operates, and they call cremation by pyre, and they have a means to cremate outdoors. I can't elaborate much myself on the techniques they use. I know it's an enclosed but yet outdoor facility, and they have very specific licensing that they've gone through their state. They're by no means with the state of Michigan, or does the state of Michigan allow that here?
No.
So they are equipped to do it at a stationary location, so
Yeah.
as you understand it, don't ask if the body can be pushed out on a raft and then a flaming arrow shot into it.
That's the truth. Yeah.
We haven't reached that point. Okay.
Not yet. At least not that we know of.
So following through with the cremation process then, let me ask you, Sherman, what is the process? A loved one passes, the family wants cremation, what do they do?
Well, someone's going to contact the funeral home. The person is going to be brought back to the funeral home. An appointment set up with the family to get the information about the deceased for the death certificate, and also if they want a newspaper notice. The death certificate is sent to the doctor for the cause of death. When we get that back, then it's filed with the medical examiner, who will approve or disapprove it for the cremation to take place. And once all the paperwork is back in, then it's a trip to the crematory.
And another cremation question, if someone is cremated, can their loved ones then spread the ashes wherever they want?
That's one of those gray areas, is what my personal feeling is. It used to be that you couldn't spread them where there was going to cause a public hazard or a nuisance. You were not supposed to spread them in Michigan's waters. Although I have an aunt and uncle in Saubel River, and I have my wife's cousin is in his favorite marble can, coffee can, off the shore of Chicago.
I have to imagine that one has probably violated a fair amount in Michigan, really.
You know, once they take them home from the funeral home, we don't know what they do with them. Some people say, well, I'm going to go scatter them all around the farm. That's where Dad wanted to be. And I always tell them, this is Sherm's 2 cents worth. Bury a portion of them someplace. You may never, ever go there, but you'll always know that they're there should you want to.
And then a follow-up question again on cremation. Can you bury ashes on your property? We talked about a family graveyard. Ashes are not the same.
Once the cremation has taken place, as far as the state's concerned, that's the final disposition, as opposed to maybe a ground burial or a donation to medical science. But once the cremation is done, that's as far as the state's concerned about it.
Turning to burial, we have a question about putting items in the casket with the body, and you see that done with some regularity. Are there limits on what people can add, and how do you know what stays and what should come back out? How is that handled?
Usually right before we do the final closing of the casket, hopefully before then actually, I'll discuss with the nearest of kin what they would like to remain in the casket. And in regards to what they can and can't place in there, there's not really, it's to the funeral director or funeral home's discretion. I can't really imagine saying no to anything, but I don't want to say that you can put anything in there because you don't want to open yourself up for you know, I'm not even sure what to say, but. You
know, we've seen favorite fly rods, fifth of whiskey slipped in Grandpa's pocket, can of beer. One guy that we had a service for, he loved Domino's pizza. And
did he go with his Domino's?
Yeah.
Did he?
Yeah.
But that's meaningful to the family.
Exactly. And that's like, it's like he says, you know, we wouldn't tell somebody, no, you can't do that.
No.
But if it got to be something that was either illegal or ethically wrong, then we would say something.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the questions coming in. Our program is continuing, and we still have time to hear from you if you have questions for our funeral directors. Back to cremation, it is a popular topic this evening. As you say, you handle a lot of cremations, within your business. How many people can be buried in one plot if they're all cremated?
I'd say that that'll depend on the cemetery. Now, in my experience, most cemeteries will allow up to 2. And there's certain ways you can always get around that. In a sense, you could have a niche burial in a
Columbarium.
or columbarium on the plot, and then also a burial in there, and you might be able to get 3. But again, that's a cemetery regulated thing, and I'd say a majority of them limit to 2. I mean, they have to.
I once told a family you could probably put a dozen on there space-wise. Well, they went back and told the sexton that, and I got a nasty phone call. No, you're not putting a dozen people on there.
So logistics are different than regulations.
Correct.
What you can
And I know
put on
that there's
there.
a couple of cemeteries that won't allow you to put 1.
Oh, okay. Now, we suspected this question would come up, and I know there are some limits as to how deep you can get into specifics, but from Sheboygan, there is a question on how much would an adult cremation cost? So, as we were talking beforehand, there are a number of factors that can go into the cost of, final arrangements for people. So let's start with cremation. Give me a sense, if you would, for what a kind of a price range and maybe some of the factors, even with cremation, which seems more simple and more cost effective, but what can still impact the costs on cremation?
Okay.
Do you want to have a traditional funeral and use that rental casket that one of the other viewers asked about? Because a lot of families don't realize that you can have a full funeral and then, rather than a ground burial, have a cremation. Because all cremation is an alternative to a ground burial or donating a body to science. So, the prices can range a couple thousand, more or less, up to.
As much as you want to pay, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. This is an interesting follow-up from Lexington. Does it cost extra in cremation if you have a pacemaker or an artificial knee?
Well, actually, the pacemaker has to be removed, being that there's a battery within there. It would actually explode in the retort. In regards to artificial knees or if you had to have screws placed into a leg, or those remain in the body, and then after cremation they're collected, whether with a magnet or so, and separated from the remains. Cost-wise, there wouldn't be any cost difference.
Alrighty. And you had mentioned, Sherman, the option of donating your body to science, and a caller actually commented on that as well, not with a question, but just to say it's an alternative. Are funeral directors able to help or offer contacts for someone who wants to do that?
We have contact information for all 3 of the medical schools in Michigan. Most of the medical schools, in fact, I think all of them, require that the individual themselves has to take care of the paperwork and sign it before the donation can take place after death.
Oh, so the person who is deceased had to have indicated that while
Well, they have to have already taken care of the paperwork.
I see. I see. And I guess it's not, you can't just assume, though, because someone donates their body to science, that it necessarily is a low-cost proceeding, because there can still be a full service with that, correct?
Correct. Correct. And you have to remember, too, that none of the medical schools have any way of transporting a body. So the funeral home is involved, besides filing the death certificate on all the legal paperwork. We're also responsible for getting the body from the funeral home to whichever of the 3 medical schools that they desire to have.
So at the very minimum, there would be transportation costs and the paperwork piece of it.
Right.
Okay. All righty. Yeah. I'm surprised it took this long to get to prepaid funeral questions. The last time we talked to funeral directors, this was a very busy topic. From Ludington, we have a question. If a person has a prepaid funeral and the funeral home closes, what happens to their prepaid account?
Well, there's a number of things that could happen. It kind of depends on how the funeral home closed, too. If the funeral home sold to another entity but closed their doors, so then in that situation, the new funeral home that paid for they would have purchased all their pre-funded funerals, and then the contracts would have moved over. Now, if the funeral home closed and no funeral home picked up those, then the family can take that contract to another firm, and the new funeral home can honor that contract. Once you pre-fund a funeral home, or a funeral contract, I mean, you won't lose your money, in a sense, if something were to happen to the entity that it's attached with.
Okay, we have like a minute left, but I do want to get this question very quickly. From Alpena, an individual has an 83-year-old father with life insurance. They're saying, should we prepay? Maybe you don't have a yes or no, but what are some factors they should consider briefly?
Depending on the value of the insurance, if the gentleman ever needs to receive any kind of DSS, social services help, if he's in a nursing home, the costs are prohibitive. He can apply for social services aid. He can transfer the ownership of that policy out of the family's hands or his hands and put it through a funeral trust that's run by the Michigan Funeral Directors Association. And that will save that policy, but there again, it depends on the value of the policy.
So that would definitely be a reason to consider that, to kind of protect that money, have it set aside for the final arrangements. I would love to keep talking. This is very interesting, and we got a lot of calls. Thank you for helping to add to our conversation, but we're out of time. Thank you to Taylor Sheahan-Stahl from the Charles R. Lux Funeral Home in Mount Pleasant.
Thank you.
It's been great to have you. And Sherman Rowley from Rowley Funeral Home, also in Mount Pleasant.
Thank you. It was good being
Very nice to have you here. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions, and our phone operators for taking your questions and getting them to us so quickly. We remind you to check out our Facebook page, and even Facebook.com, Ask the Specialists. And if there are questions we didn't get to this evening, we'll pick those up and try to get those answers to you that way. We invite you to join us again next week, of course, for a special edition of Ask the Specialists when we ask the doctors. I'm Amy Robinson. Good night.